What happens when a text message redefines your marriage? Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. The glowing screen read, "He signed the equity transfer. You can leave him tomorrow." It was 2:14 a.m. on a random Tuesday. The house was dead quiet, save for the hum of the central air and the rhythmic, peaceful breathing of my wife, Chloe, asleep beside me. I had only woken up because I desperately needed a glass of water, but then her phone screen lit up on the nightstand, casting a harsh, artificial glare across the dark bedroom. I wasn't a snooper. In 5 years of what I genuinely believed was a flawless marriage, I had never once felt the urge to check her messages. But the notification banner was right there, glaring at me like a neon sign in the dark. The sender's name was simply saved as Julian. I sat completely frozen on the edge of our custom oak bed, staring at those horrific words until they burned into my retinas. My name is Mark. I'm 34, and I run a successful mid-sized architectural firm that I proudly built from the ground up. Over the last decade, I had poured every ounce of my sweat, blood, and tears into that company. 2 years ago, Chloe and I bought this sprawling suburban dream house. We spent 8 grueling months renovating it together. She picked out the expensive Italian marble countertops. I meticulously designed the open-concept living space. I thought we were building a beautiful life together. I thought we were a team, a partnership, a perfect union. As I looked back down at the sleeping woman next to me, her soft, blonde hair draped gracefully over the silk pillowcase, her face relaxed in absolute serenity, a cold, violent wave of nausea washed over me. Who was Julian? What equity transfer? I hadn't signed anything. At least, not knowingly. The psychological disconnect was utterly agonizing. The human brain tries to protect you in moments of acute trauma, desperately throwing out logical lifelines. It's a prank, I told myself. It's a wrong number. It's a massive misunderstanding. But the specific mention of an equity transfer tied directly to my complex business terminology. It was too precise, too deliberate. This wasn't a mistake. This was a meticulously planned countdown. I felt my chest tighten painfully, the oxygen suddenly evaporating from the entire room. Every laugh, every kiss, every quiet moment we had shared in this house over the last few years suddenly felt like scenes from a twisted script I hadn't been allowed to read. The pristine illusion of my perfect life was violently shattering in real time, quickly replaced by a suffocating, paralyzing dread. I stared at the sleeping woman I loved and realized I didn't know her at all. Lying awake for the rest of the night, my mind violently spiraled backward, obsessively replaying the entire history of our relationship. I first met Chloe 5 years ago at a crowded, upscale art gallery downtown. She was standing in front of a striking abstract painting, looking effortlessly beautiful and wonderfully out of place. I offered to buy her a drink, and from that exact moment, I was completely hooked. She was charming, deeply supportive, and seemingly flawless. She listened to my ambitious rants about architecture with genuine interest, always knowing exactly what to say to boost my confidence. But there were always those convenient, tragic gaps in her personal history. When we started getting serious, I naturally asked about her family. She looked down, her eyes welling with perfectly timed tears, and told me a heartbreaking story about growing up in a turbulent foster care system. She claimed she lost her only sister in a devastating house fire, and all her childhood photos and mementos had burned to ashes. I was instantly overwhelmed by a fierce, protective instinct. I wanted to be the safe harbor she had never known. My grounded, cynical best friend, Dave, wasn't quite as easily swayed. I remember grabbing a beer with him shortly after I proposed. Dave looked me dead in the eye and said, "Mark, she's great, but don't you think she's a little too perfect? It's like she's a mirrored reflection of exactly what you want to see." I had laughed him off, chalking it up to his natural pessimism and his own recent messy divorce. I was deeply, blindly in love, and I violently rejected any narrative that threatened my newfound happiness. I gladly provided everything for her. I paid off the small debts she brought into the relationship, upgraded her car, and made sure she never had to worry about money again. She played the role of the devoted, doting partner with Oscar-worthy precision. She managed our social calendar, kept our stunning home immaculate, and always greeted me with a warm kiss after a long, stressful day at the firm. I thought my generosity was healing her traumatic past. Now, staring at the ceiling as the pale morning light slowly crept through our bedroom blinds, the terrifying reality of my situation began to crystallize. Dave had been absolutely right. I had eagerly built my entire life around beautifully constructed, completely invisible lies. The morning sun felt excessively bright as I walked into the kitchen, desperately trying to steady my violently shaking hands. Chloe was already there, humming softly while pouring organic coffee into my favorite ceramic mug. She looked radiant, wearing my oversized college sweatshirt, the absolute picture of domestic bliss. "Morning, handsome," she chirped, sliding the steaming mug across the marble island. I took a slow sip, forcing my heart rate to slow down. I needed to test her. I needed to see the mask slip. "Hey," I began, keeping my tone incredibly casual. "Your phone buzzed late last night. Woke me up for a second. Everything okay?" Looked like a text from someone named Julian. She didn't miss a single beat. She didn't drop the mug. She didn't stutter. She didn't even blink. She just let out a soft, sympathetic sigh and leaned against the counter. "Oh, Julian from the downtown brokerage. I'm so sorry he woke you up, honey. He was supposed to send me those final fabric swatches for the guest room yesterday. Poor guy is going through a horrific divorce right now, and he drinks and texts at all hours. He's a total mess." The alibi was breathtakingly smooth. It was highly believable, logically sound, and delivered with the perfect amount of casual annoyance. A desperate part of me wanted to believe it so badly. I wanted to laugh, kiss her forehead, and go to work feeling completely relieved. "Wow, that sounds rough," I replied, forcing a sympathetic smile. "Yeah, it is," she said, walking over to wrap her arms securely around my waist. "But let's not worry about other people's drama. We have our anniversary dinner to think about this Friday." She kissed my cheek lightly, but as she pulled away, I noticed it. She subtly rubbed her left thumb over her diamond wedding band twice. It was a deeply ingrained, self-soothing physical tic I had only ever seen her do when we were dealing with extreme stress, like when her supposed foster mother passed away and she had to handle the arrangements. She was actively managing her anxiety right in front of my face. The text message had nothing to do with fabric swatches or a messy divorce. She knew that I had seen the message, and she was rapidly calculating her next move. Her smile was perfectly warm, but her eyes were entirely dead and calculating. As soon as Chloe left the house for her mid-morning Pilates class, a sickening surge of adrenaline flooded my veins. Driven by a suffocating, unbearable anxiety, I realized I had to cross a major boundary. I had to know the truth. I practically sprinted to her immaculately organized home office. In 5 years, I had never once snooped through her personal belongings. I respected her privacy implicitly, but the agonizing paranoia was eating me alive. I sat at her sleek desk and opened her laptop. It was heavily password protected, which was entirely new. She had always left it unlocked before. Frustrated, I began frantically tearing through her filing cabinet. Bills, pristine tax returns, neatly categorized receipts, everything looked agonizingly normal. It was entirely too clean, a perfectly curated museum of a mundane suburban life. My heart hammered aggressively against my ribs as I dropped to my knees, pulling the bottom drawer completely out of its tracks. I reached my hand into the dark, dusty cavity beneath the wooden frame. My fingers brushed against something thick and securely taped to the bottom panel. I ripped it free. It was a heavy, unmarked manila envelope. I sat heavily on the plush rug, my breath catching in my throat as I tore the seal open. A small, black burner phone slid out onto the floor, completely dead. But that wasn't what made the blood violently rush from my head. Inside the envelope was a pristine New Jersey driver's license. The woman smiling back at me from the plastic card had Chloe's unmistakable green eyes, Chloe's delicate nose, and Chloe's bright smile. But the name printed boldly next to her face wasn't Chloe Miller. The birth date was 3 years older than she claimed to be. The name on the official government ID was Sarah Jenkins. My brain short-circuited. I stared at the photo, desperately trying to reconcile the stranger on the card with the woman who had slept next to me for half a decade. Who the hell was Sarah Jenkins? Why did she have a secret identity securely taped to the bottom of her desk? The devastating reality of the glowing text message from Julian crashed over me once again. multiplying the sheer psychological horror of my situation 1,000 times over. My hands violently shook as I held the plastic proof of her fabricated existence. I didn't go to the architectural firm that afternoon. Instead, I frantically called Dave and told him to meet me immediately at a dimly lit, out-of-the-way coffee shop on the industrial side of town. When Dave walked in, he took one look at my pale, sweating face and slid into the booth without saying a word. I didn't waste any time. I reached into my jacket pocket and slid the New Jersey driver's license across the scratched wooden table. Dave stared at it for a long time, his jaw tightly clenching. He didn't offer a smug, "I told you so." He just looked incredibly grim and deeply concerned. "Mark, what the hell is this?" he whispered urgently. I quickly explained everything. The terrifying late-night text from Julian, the flawlessly executed lie about the fabric swatches, and the hidden manila envelope under her desk drawer. "We need to look into this," Dave said, immediately pulling out his laptop. Dave manages high-end commercial real estate properties and has access to extensive, premium background check databases to screen corporate tenants. We tethered his laptop to his phone and began typing frantically. We ran the name Chloe Miller first. Just as I feared, the results were chillingly sparse. According to the vast digital records, Chloe Miller simply did not exist before the year 2018. There were absolutely no tax records, no high school diploma, no credit history, no previous addresses. It was a terrifying, gaping blank space in the digital world. Then, Dave typed in Sarah Jenkins along with the birth date from the hidden ID. The screen instantly exploded with data. Sarah Jenkins had a massive, highly documented history. There were multiple evictions in Nevada, a string of unpaid judgments in Florida, and a heavily flagged financial profile. But what completely stopped my heart was the marriage certificate. Sarah Jenkins had been legally married in 2015 to a man named Julian Vance. They had never formally divorced. The mysterious sender wasn't a broker. He was her actual husband. The suffocating weight of the betrayal physically pressed down on my chest, making it entirely impossible to draw a full breath. I was nothing more than a carefully selected target in an elaborate, multi-year financial con. The woman I married had simply materialized out of thin air 5 short years ago. Dave shut his laptop with a sharp, decisive click that echoed in the quiet coffee shop. "You need professional help, Mark. Right now," he stated firmly. He immediately recommended P.I. Reed, a sharp, fiercely intimidating private investigator in her late 50s whom he had previously used to track down a corporate embezzler. I met with her in a remarkably sterile, unmarked office building 2 hours later. I slid the fake ID and a screenshot of the terrifying text message across her massive steel desk. Reed didn't offer any useless sympathy. She just meticulously reviewed the items, asked me a dozen rapid-fire, highly intrusive questions about my finances, and told me her retainer fee. "The hardest part," she warned me, her voice deadpan and serious, "is that you have to go home and act completely normal. If she senses you know anything, they will accelerate their timeline and vanish with your money." That evening was an agonizing exercise in pure psychological torture. I walked through the front door of my sprawling suburban home, my heart pounding relentlessly against my ribs. Chloe was standing in our beautifully lit kitchen, chopping fresh vegetables, a glass of red wine resting on the counter. "Hey babe, how was work?" she called out brightly. The sheer agonizing tension of having to smile, take off my coat, and walk toward her was physically painful. Every alarm bell in my nervous system was screaming at me to run out the door. Instead, I walked up behind her, wrapping my arms gently around her waist. She leaned back into me, humming happily. Knowing that a private investigator was currently digging through her criminal past while I held her in my arms made me feel entirely sick to my stomach. Every casual touch, every sweet word she spoke, felt like a highly venomous spider slowly crawling across my bare skin. I asked her about her day, pretending to care about her fictitious Pilates class and her imaginary errands. We sat down to eat the dinner she had prepared, and I forced myself to swallow every single bite while making active plans to absolutely destroy her life. I forced myself to turn around and passionately kiss the monster in my kitchen. 3 excruciatingly long days later, my phone vibrated with a secure message from P.I. Reed. "Come to the office. I have the preliminary file." I immediately canceled my afternoon meetings and drove downtown, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned completely white. When I sat down in front of Reed, she didn't mince words. She slid a thick, heavily tabbed manila folder across the desk. "It's worse than we thought, Mark," she said bluntly. "Her real name is Sarah Jenkins. Julian Vance is indeed her legal husband, and he is a twice-convicted interstate fraudster." Reed opened the folder, revealing a horrifyingly detailed timeline of my wife's actual life. Chloe, Sarah, had over $400,000 in outstanding legal judgments against her across 3 different states. They were a highly coordinated, terrifyingly efficient team. They ran incredibly sophisticated long cons. Their established pattern was sickeningly clear. Sarah would change her identity, purposefully target a successful, trusting professional man, marry him, slowly inflate his business value, take out massive, fraudulent equity loans, and then completely vanish into the wind with the cash. I stared blankly at a series of surveillance photos Reed had managed to pull from a recent bank security feed. It showed Chloe and Julian sitting closely together in a rented sedan, passionately kissing and laughing. My stomach violently rebelled. The emotional floor completely dropped out from beneath me, leaving me in a terrifying freefall. I had genuinely believed I was the love of her life, the strong protector she had always desperately needed. I had completely rearranged my finances, my future, and my heart to accommodate her fabricated trauma. But looking at these cold, hard documents, the undeniable truth was staring me right in the face. I was never a husband to her. I was just a highly lucrative project. Every loving whisper, every romantic vacation, every single moment of intimacy was a calculated, cold-blooded maneuver to gain access to my hard-earned assets. My entire marriage was nothing but an intricately designed financial slaughterhouse. I was nothing but a carefully selected piggy bank waiting to be violently smashed open. "We have to find out exactly what their current play is," Reed stated, tapping a heavily manicured finger aggressively on the massive stack of documents. The text message said, "You signed the equity transfer. They are actively moving to cash out." I leaned forward, my hands trembling violently as I frantically sifted through the terrifying paperwork. Suddenly, my eyes locked onto a single, deeply buried page toward the back of the file. It was a formal application from a major commercial lending bank for a $1.2 million line of credit. The collateral listed was the entire equity of my architectural firm. My heart completely stopped. I stared closely at the bottom of the densely printed page. There it was, my signature. It was an absolutely flawless, terrifyingly accurate forgery. She had perfectly replicated the way I looped my M and crossed my K. The approval status next to the signature box proudly read, "Pending final disbursement." The agonizing realization slammed into me like a speeding freight train. The motive suddenly clicked into crystal clear focus. The bizarre text message finally made perfect, horrifying sense. He signed the equity transfer. She had proudly told Julian the massive trap was fully set. They were boldly planning to drain my company dry, completely wipe out my life savings, and disappear into the ether before the bank even processed the final paperwork. I looked closely at the scheduled disbursement date stamped boldly at the top of the forged application. It was scheduled for this upcoming Friday. Today was Monday. The absolute panic I felt was indescribable. If that massive loan cleared, I would lose my firm, my beautiful suburban house, and be completely buried under an insurmountable mountain of fraudulent debt. I would be financially ruined for the rest of my natural life. The clock wasn't just ticking, it was loudly blaring a deafening alarm. I had to outsmart a seasoned professional con artist who currently slept next to me every single night, and I had to do it completely flawlessly. One wrong look, one misplaced word, and she would instantly realize I knew, triggering her to empty our joint checking accounts and flee immediately. I had exactly 4 days to save everything I had spent my life building. Early Tuesday morning, I lied right to Chloe's smiling face, claiming I had back-to-back, incredibly stressful architectural site visits out in the county. Instead of driving to a construction site, I drove straight to the sterile, heavily air-conditioned downtown branch of my primary bank. I had arranged an emergency, highly confidential meeting with the senior branch manager and my fiercely loyal corporate attorney. We sat in a heavily soundproofed glass conference room. the tension so thick it was hard to breathe. I aggressively slid P.I. Reed's comprehensive report and the forged commercial loan documents across the polished table. The bank manager's face turned completely white. We immediately sprang into decisive, ruthless action. We quietly and permanently froze the fraudulent $2 million commercial credit line, flagging it internally as an active criminal investigation. But we had to be incredibly careful. If Chloe logged into our shared portal and saw the accounts were frozen, she would immediately bolt. So, my attorney brilliantly orchestrated a series of silent flags on all of our joint accounts. To the outside observer, the accounts looked perfectly normal and fully active. But behind the bank's firewall, any wire transfer, massive withdrawal, or credit line activation over $100 now required my physical, in-person presence and 2 forms of photo identification. I systematically cut off every single financial artery she had carefully connected to my life over the last 5 years. I was methodically and ruthlessly dismantling her intricate bomb in the dark, cutting the wires while she was still holding the detonator. I spent 4 grueling hours sitting in that freezing conference room, legally barricading my entire life against the woman I called my wife. When I finally walked out of the heavy glass doors into the blinding afternoon sun, I felt a strange, terrifying mix of intense triumph and profound sorrow. I had successfully protected my hard-earned assets and saved my beloved firm from absolute destruction. But the hardest, most agonizing part of this nightmare was still ahead of me. I had to go back to our house. The financial fortress was completely secured, but I still had to play the loving fool. Wednesday night was a masterclass in pure, unadulterated psychological torture. Chloe had purposefully decided to make my absolute favorite dinner, a rich, complicated lamb ragout that took hours to prepare. She poured me an incredibly generous glass of expensive red wine, smiling warmly as she dramatically sat sideways on my lap in the living room. She delicately stroked the hair at the nape of my neck, softly talking about our future together. She even floated the deeply manipulative idea of finally having children next year, playfully suggesting we convert the downstairs office into a nursery. The sheer, terrifying audacity of her performance made me physically nauseous. She was expertly securing the emotional tether, ensuring I was completely blinded by love before she mercilessly cut the cord and vanished with my life savings on Friday. It took every single ounce of willpower I possessed not to violently scream in her face and throw her out of my home. The adrenaline coursing through my veins made my hands shake slightly, so I kept them firmly planted on my knees. I forced a loving, incredibly fake smile onto my face. I gently stroked her arm, looked deep into her calculating green eyes, and softly told her that she was the absolute best thing that had ever happened to my life. I played the part of the devoted, oblivious husband with a terrifyingly precise level of dedication. Every time she kissed my cheek, I had to suppress a violent, physical shudder of absolute disgust. I agreed with her nursery ideas, I laughed at her charming jokes, and I held her tightly while we watched television. The cognitive dissonance was entirely agonizing. I was actively participating in a romantic fantasy with a woman who did not exist, a phantom who was systematically plotting my complete and utter destruction. As she eventually drifted off to sleep with her head resting peacefully on my chest, my mind raced with the meticulous details of the trap I was carefully laying. I gently stroked her soft hair, my heart completely hardened into a cold, unbreakable stone. I watched her smile brightly, knowing she planned to completely ruin me by the weekend. By Thursday afternoon, the agonizing tension had reached an absolute boiling point. P.I. Reed had been heavily monitoring Chloe's cloned burner phone, and she quickly sent me an urgent, encrypted text. Target is moving. Meet me at the location. I immediately abandoned my architectural blueprints and rushed to meet Reed. I quietly slipped into the passenger seat of her unassuming, dark gray sedan parked discreetly across the street from a heavily run-down, seedy motel on the extreme edge of the city limits. 10 agonizing minutes later, Chloe's sleek, luxury SUV slowly pulled into the cracked, weed-infested parking lot. She looked nervously around before quickly slipping out of the driver's seat, wearing large sunglasses and a dark coat. I held my breath as she briskly walked toward room 114. The heavy door swung open before she even knocked. Julian Vance stepped out into the harsh afternoon sunlight. He was taller than I expected, wearing an expensive suit that looked ridiculously out of place at the dilapidated motel. They didn't just briefly talk or exchange documents. She immediately threw her arms around his neck, and they kissed. It wasn't a quick greeting. It was a deep, fiercely passionate, familiar kiss. It was the undeniable kiss of a real, devoted couple. The sickening reality hit me with the force of a physical blow. He was her real husband. He was her actual partner in life and crime. I was nothing. I was just the wealthy, oblivious Mark unknowingly funding their twisted, horrific romance. I watched as Julian affectionately tucked a stray lock of blonde hair behind her ear, smiling broadly as she excitedly showed him something on her phone, likely the forged loan approval she thought was processing tomorrow. They were aggressively celebrating my impending financial execution. Sitting in that cramped, hot car, staring through the binoculars at the woman I had promised to love forever, the last remaining shred of my denial completely evaporated. The sheer cruelty of their highly coordinated con was breathtakingly evil. My hands gripped the dashboard of the sedan so tightly that my fingers cramped. The crushing weight of their ultimate betrayal physically knocked the breath out of my lungs. Friday was officially our 5-year wedding anniversary. It was also the exact day she firmly believed the fraudulent $1.2 million commercial loan would finally clear. I woke up early, acting incredibly excited, and told Chloe I had planned a massive, highly exclusive surprise for her. I instructed her to dress up in her absolute best outfit for a celebratory dinner at the most expensive, elite restaurant in the downtown district. I also casually mentioned that I had invited Dave to join us for a quick, celebratory champagne toast before our intimate dinner. She feigned slight annoyance at Dave's inclusion, but quickly masked it with a brilliant, loving smile, totally confident that her massive payday was only hours away. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, P.I. Reed and I were aggressively setting the final, inescapable trap. Using the clone data from Chloe's secret burner phone, Reed carefully drafted a highly urgent text message to Julian. Posing flawlessly as Chloe, Reed sent, "The transfer hit a snag. I need you at the restaurant bar at 8 p.m. Don't make a scene. We are celebrating early." We knew Julian's uncontrollable greed and deep arrogance would absolutely compel him to show up if he thought the massive payout was suddenly in jeopardy. I spent the rest of the afternoon meticulously reviewing the thick folder of devastating evidence with Dave, ensuring every single document was perfectly arranged. I wanted absolutely no yelling, no dramatic screaming matches, and no chaotic scenes. I wanted an incredibly cold, utterly precise, and brutally surgical execution of her carefully constructed lies. As the sun began to slowly set, casting long, dark shadows across our beautifully renovated suburban house, I stood in front of the hallway mirror. I adjusted my tie, meticulously checking my reflection. I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, terrifyingly calm resolve. The man who had deeply loved Chloe Miller was completely dead, violently murdered by a single, glowing text message. I adjusted my tailored suit and prepared to burn my fake marriage to the ground. The upscale restaurant was dimly lit and incredibly crowded when we arrived. Dave was already sitting quietly at our reserved corner booth. Chloe looked absolutely stunning in a sleek black dress, radiating an aura of total victory. She completely believed she had won. We sat down, ordered expensive champagne, and made agonizingly polite small talk. At exactly 8:05 p.m., I saw Julian nervously enter the bustling bar area out of the corner of my eye. The trap was perfectly sprung. I slowly put down my crystal champagne glass. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't show an ounce of fiery anger. I simply reached into the inner pocket of my tailored jacket. "Happy anniversary, Chloe," I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. I slowly slid the heavy, unmarked manila envelope across the pristine white tablecloth. She looked mildly confused, expecting expensive jewelry. She eagerly tore the seal open. The contents violently spilled out onto the table. Crystal clear surveillance photographs of her passionately kissing Julian at the seedy motel. The thoroughly canceled, heavily flagged commercial loan documents. And right in the center, her fake New Jersey driver's license with the name Sarah Jenkins boldly staring up at her. The transformation was absolutely instantaneous and completely horrifying to witness. The sweet, loving, devoted wife instantly evaporated right before my eyes. Her posture violently stiffened, her jaw rigidly locked, and her bright green eyes turned into bottomless pools of black, terrifying ice. She didn't scream or cry. She just stared at the undeniable evidence of her absolute failure. Dave sat silently, his arms crossed securely over his chest, watching the monster finally reveal itself. She slowly looked up from the table, locking her cold eyes directly onto mine. The mask had completely slipped, revealing the ruthless, highly dangerous criminal hiding securely underneath. She knew she was entirely trapped, deeply cornered without a single avenue of escape. The woman staring back at me was a cold, calculating predator who had finally lost. As Chloe desperately reached for her purse to bolt, the situation aggressively escalated. Julian, having realized he had been totally set up, attempted to quickly slip out the front doors of the restaurant. He didn't make it. P.I. Reed had previously fed all the massive interstate fraud warrants to the federal authorities. 3 plainclothes detectives smoothly intercepted him at the coat check. There was absolutely no chaotic screaming, just the incredibly cold, highly satisfying click of heavy metal handcuffs echoing softly over the ambient jazz music. 2 heavily armed officers quietly approached our corner table and formally asked Sarah Jenkins to stand up. She didn't say a single word to me. She didn't offer a fake apology or a dramatic tear. She just glared at me with absolute, unadulterated venom as they forcefully escorted her out of the upscale dining room. Dave firmly placed his hand on my shaking shoulder, offering silent, unwavering support. Later that agonizing night, I went back to the sprawling suburban house completely alone. I didn't sleep. I aggressively grabbed 3 massive black trash bags and began violently packing up every single trace of her fabricated existence. I threw away her expensive clothes, her meticulously curated cosmetics, and the beautiful photos of our fake life together. By the time the sun finally rose, the house was entirely stripped of Chloe Miller. I stood alone in the center of the beautifully renovated, open-concept living room that I had painstakingly designed for us. The heavy silence in the massive house was absolutely deafening. Everything I had worked for was perfectly safe. My business was entirely secure, my assets were heavily protected, and the dangerous criminals who tried to destroy me were locked in federal custody. But the emotional devastation was completely overwhelming. I had successfully survived a horrific financial assassination, but my heart had been brutally hollowed out in the process. I was entirely alone in a beautiful house that felt like an incredibly lavish tomb. It has been exactly 2 long, grueling years since that horrific anniversary dinner. Intense, weekly therapy absolutely saved my life. I had to systematically relearn how to process reality, completely untangling the massive web of manipulation Sarah had meticulously woven into my brain. My architectural firm is currently thriving beyond my wildest dreams, and Dave is still my absolute rock, actively helping me navigate the complexities of trusting people again. Sarah and Julian both plead heavily guilty to massive interstate fraud and are currently serving extensive sentences in a federal penitentiary. The financial wreckage was eventually sorted out, but the deep psychological scars will likely remain with me forever. I learned the absolute hardest, most devastating lesson a man can ever learn. If something seems entirely too perfect, it almost usually is. You have to aggressively trust your gut instincts. When Dave warned me that she was merely a mirrored reflection of my own desires, he was entirely right. Con artists don't just steal your hard-earned money. They violently steal your reality, aggressively reflecting your deepest hopes back at you to keep you completely blind to the truth. I still occasionally check my phone in the middle of the night, haunted by the lingering ghost of that terrifying text message. But the paralyzing fear no longer fiercely controls my daily life. I aggressively rebuilt my shattered foundation, refusing to let their evil define my future. A single, bizarre text message from a hidden accomplice completely destroyed the fabricated life I thought I loved, but it also forcefully compelled me to rebuild it truthfully. I survived the ultimate betrayal and emerged completely unbreakable on the other side of hell.